Welcome back. My name's Tim, and I'm going to talk about wheelchairs. So we're kind of like, we've progressed to the end of the continuum here. We went from least restrictive, right? Canes, walkers, gait trainers, and now we're going to touch on wheelchairs. So I'll go over some different types here. I'll start with the manual wheelchairs before I get into the power. Wheelchair, and I'll go over some wheelchair safety. So let's start with manual wheelchairs. Different types. Picture of that's a transport chair. Those primarily are for people, you know, they could still walk, but let's say maybe distances are an issue. You can easily fold those up, throw them in your trunk, take them, you know, to doctor's appointments and whatnot. Those typically, you know, they're cheaper. You can get them at Drug Mart. You know, insurance, insurance would cover something like that, but I would never, I usually don't bill insurance for that type of wheelchair just because it's affordable. And then we have your standard chairs are like the ones you would have. I got a picture of one here that you would see in a hospital or. So these are a little more money. So we would bill insurance for a chair like this. It's all locked up. Oh, there you go. So that's your standard chair. This could have some different options on it. You know, you can have one that has a reclining back. Different heights. Hemi height meaning that it's a little lower to the ground for those that propel with their feet. I said recline option. And then these chairs also we actually get different options on them, which cost more money, but different lightweight chairs are still your standard chairs, but they weigh a lot less. They have different, more function for somebody that self-propels, somebody that's more outgoing. There's a tier system, so you can get different options depending on if you can justify it that person needs. And then we come to the tilt and space, which we brought here. These are definitely more involved. These are for those individuals that need some repositioning. They can't change their position in the chair, so we can tilt this and it could change the pressure to their bottom, to their back. We do a lot of these chairs. Again, these are covered by insurance. It's getting more difficult for Medicare coverage on some wheelchairs, but the lightweight, like standard chairs, are hard to get covered. These, though, aren't so much as long as you can justify a need. So those are your types of manual chairs. This slide's kind of out of place, but wheelchair pre-check. This goes to our wheelchair safety. It's kind of like what Paula was saying before you use a lift. You want to make sure that there's nothing broken or defective before you use it. Some important things you want to check before you use a wheelchair is obviously the brakes, the frame. If there's ever a crack in the frame or missing bolts, don't use the chair. The pelvic belt, the safety belt, the lap belts, make sure those are operational, especially for transport. Wheels, make sure the wheels are secure, good working condition, and then the footrests, make sure they fit. So it's just a quick pre-check you can do before you use a wheelchair. If it's broken, what do you do? Well, if you can fix it, if it's something simple, go ahead and do that. You can call the vendor. You don't need to call like anybody from the county. You can go directly to the vendor, like Miller's or Health Aid of Ohio. They can come fix it. If you're just unsure, you can notify the SA, the Q, and they can make an OTPT referral, and we can help with the repair. So just something you could do. Do not transport the wheelchair in a van or bus if the brakes, frame, seatbelt, or wheels are defective and in need of repair. If it's like a footrest, don't deny that person's transportation. But if it's brakes or something with the frame, don't transport it on a van or a bus. It's just not safe. I threw this slide in here too. I threw a lot of these slides together here. So why do we use a wheelchair? It's not, it's not for the caregiver, right? It's actually for the individual. And they're used for the individual to increase their function. It's for those, and it could be used, for a wide range of people, those that can propel themselves, like in a lightweight chair, or those that are dependent on us, to assist them. But the overall goal of a wheelchair is to increase an individual's independence with mobility and provide a way for individuals to safely access, I left out home. Home's big here. Access their home, community, and the environment. So we got to look at the goal of a wheelchair. It's not that, so-and-so is difficult to ambulate, so I'm just going to use a chair. That's not the purpose of it. It's to increase their independence or their ability to assist with their ADLs and also to access their home and their environment. So keep that in mind. When we try to get insurance to pay for a chair, it has to be justified that that chair is going to help them participate in some kind of activity in the house, in the community. So that's got to be part of the justification. All right, so we have to make sure, before you take a wheelchair out in the community, make sure if the person's going to be using it by themselves, propelling themselves, make sure they're safe outside in the community, crossing the street, things like that. We do have travel trainers that are available through the county board. And Christy talked about, I'm on the tech support team as well. We have different departments are involved in that. So if you have questions with transportation or questions about whether so-and-so can go out in the community safely, we have people available that can help make that decision and help you in that decision. All right, so curbs. Use the cutouts if they're available. That's pretty straightforward. Now, when you approach a curb forward-facing in a wheelchair, this is, in my opinion, this is the safest way. There's a couple different ways, but if you face a curb, approach it forward-facing, and as a caregiver, tip that chair back, get those front casters up on the curb, and then you can kind of push and lift the rest of the chair up. I think it's harder to go backwards and try to get up a curb going backwards with a wheelchair. Now, when you're going off a curb, I believe it's better to go backwards as a caregiver if you're helping somebody in a wheelchair. Get those bigger wheels, the rear wheels off the curb, and then slowly lower the chair back, off by tilting it and lowering it off the rest of the way. I believe that's the safest with curbs. Inclines and ramps. Keep in mind that a ramp shouldn't be too steep. 1 to 12 ratio, that's the ADA requirement. That's for public commercial properties. As a residential property, we can, there's some variations in that, but that 1 to 12 ratio is, does everybody know what that means? Right, 1 inch for every foot. So 1 inch of height, I'm sorry, 1 inch of height has to have a foot of length. Okay, and that gives you the slope. So I've been in some situations where the ramps have been very steep, and sometimes it's dangerous. I was just at one probably a month or so ago, and the steep ramp, it was not 1 to 12. I don't even know what it was, but I actually had to go backwards. I thought it was safer to go down backwards off of a steep incline. You can also descend that ramp. You can, if it's like a wide area, you can kind of go side to side to kind of slowly descend that slope. One thing to remember is never park a wheelchair. Don't lock a wheelchair on a slope and then walk away. If those brakes fail or that individual unlocks a chair, that could lead to an injury. Any questions with manual chairs? All right, let's go into power chairs real quick. Again, different types. You have your scooters, like the hover rounds. Those are our basic power mobility devices. They really only have, one drive, forward, backward. You can change the speed on them. Not a lot of options. Then you get into your power wheelchairs. What we do more of, they have more options. You can get custom seating on those chairs. You get power tilt, power recline, power seat elevation, power elevating leg rest. There's a lot more options with a power wheelchair. Don't go, if you have somebody that needs a power chair, I suggest utilizing one of us in our department to kind of help you with that decision. Don't go to, a store and just try to get set up, because they might try to sell you on something that they can easily get covered, because there's a lot to it. Again, you want to pre-check, you want to maintain these power chairs. Charge it. The batteries cost a lot of money for these things, so make sure every night the thing's plugged in. Clean them off, especially in Ohio in the winter. Clean that salt, that dirt off the chair. That salt can get in there and really wreak havoc on the chair. And then check positioning of the individual in the wheelchair. Do that for manual chairs too. If you see somebody, especially before you head out, or if you're going for a van ride and they're slouched down in the chair, they're not sitting back, take that moment to position that person in that chair. And make sure all your safety positioning straps are secured and working. All right, so this is something we see all the time, is they're in a power chair because, well, I hope that it was determined they could safely operate one. So people don't go into power chairs so that their caregiver can operate it for them. They're in it because they can do it themselves. So try to refrain from doing that. I worked at a day program in Portage County for a while, and we would see that all the time. The individual would be late for the bus, and then staff they're driving the chair, because they wanted to get them out there quickly. Well, you can run over your foot. 400, 500 pounds is a lot of weight, and that person should be able to do it themselves, or they wouldn't be in it. So if you have any thoughts of that or any concerns on the safety of that individual, again, a referral can be placed. We'll come out. We'll double check. We'll see if that person can safely operate one. And if they can't, then we'll have to make changes. But until that happens, let them operate their own chair. And then make sure they're safe in the community. And that's where our travel trainers come in again with the tech support teams. They can help. They can do a travel training, take the person out in the community. I just kind of touched on this. If you have an individual that loses the ability to safely operate a chair, that can result in injury. Some signs of that, if they're hitting the walls at the house, you're noticing that, maybe they're hitting other individuals. There's signs that maybe that person doesn't have the ability to drive this anymore. So act on that. Don't just let it go. You can contact the SA, your supervisor, the guardian, if you're concerned about those things. Again, a PT referral, OT PT referral can be placed, and we can do a safety assessment on that. What we can do with a power chair, if somebody's losing that ability, is you can set the settings on those. That's why the scooters, you can't change the settings, but when you go into a power wheelchair, we can change the speed, we can set the acceleration, the deceleration, like the stopping ability, and they might, with those adjustments, they might be able to safely use one. We're not just going to take somebody's power chair away. We want to make sure everything's done, before we would go that route. And then lastly, the environment can be altered. Maybe if we made some changes to the day program or the house, maybe they can still use it. Importance of environment with wheelchair use. look at the layout. Fully accessible home, place of employment, that's what's recommended. Turning space or turning radius, 5 foot is recommended. So I think Anne-Marie told me this, right? You spread your arms out, do a circle. That's how much space you should have for a wheelchair to. I won't do that, but so you got to have space. Height of tables, desks, sinks, toilets, barrier-free entryways, doorways, modified bathrooms. These are all things that we could do in our environments to make it more accessible and safer. If they're in a wheelchair, they're probably going to need help with transfers more than likely. And we kind of went over a pivot transfer. You know, we do that with wheelchair users, you know, from a wheelchair to a regular seat, for a regular chair. Body mechanics, environment, utilizing if you need equipment, lifts, that'll all reduce injury. Some simple things to remember: lock the chair, and then remove the barriers to the transfer. So take the headrest off, take the footrest off, armrest can come off. Those all help you make the transfer easier and safer. And then the environment, obstacles in the way, Paulo talked about this. You know, make the environment safe for the transfer. And then position the wheelchair to reduce the distance. So I'm not going to park my wheelchair out in the living room and transfer somebody, you know, with the Hoyer lift into their room. Reduce that distance. Use grab bars. If that person can stand, use grab bars. That might help. And then ask for assistance and plan the transfer before you execute it. So just take your time. Ask for help if it's available. All right, so I'm going to end here talking about transportation. Now, I want to preface this by saying I don't work in the transportation department. I do trainings with transportation with new vendors, drivers, aides on the buses. So I've been involved in it, and it's very important, and I wanted to add this to this slideshow here. I also want to say before I start is that there's very little oversight, in my opinion, with transportation and wheelchairs and things like. You see all kinds of things out there. So a lot of recommendations, but very little oversight or laws or things like that. So, and it's important. A lot of injuries can happen on vans, buses. So I'm going to start with those that just need help on a step. So they're not even wheelchair users, but they need help on steps. We didn't really cover steps. A lot of injuries can happen on steps, right? So what you want to do, if somebody needs help, you want to assist them by remaining one step below. That's important. So if you're going up, let's pretend you're going up bus steps, you want to follow that individual up the steps. You don't want to stay at the bottom and kind of just watch them, go up on their own. You want to stay below, and you got to be ready to offer support. Because if that person falls backwards, if they're coming down the steps, they fall forward, standing at the bottom of the steps, kind of watching them, you're not going to be able to do anything. So you want to be right there, one step below. Does that make sense? Now, the morning presentation talked about step stools, and they didn't like them at all. I agree, but with transportation, I think they can be a help, especially with vehicles that first step is very high on some of those buses that our individuals use. So having a step stool, and I was going to bring one. Our transportation department has nice, hard plastic, lightweight, non-skid surfaces. They're about 6 inches high, and they're awesome for that first step. Because as they get older, you have arthritis in your knees. Taking a big step hurts, and it could be dangerous. So if you have a step stool, and I don't know why there's not one in every single vehicle, really, for those that need them. And then minivans. Those minivans, and we see it all the time, are tough to get into for some people. Especially, trying to get into the middle seat. Sometimes a step stool helps. And we're not going to let them just step up there by themselves. We'll assist them, but So keep that in mind. If you're unsure, again, PTOT referral, we can come out with a step stool, or we can assess that. All right, so wheelchair users now in buses and vans. They've come a long way, but it's still, wheelchairs have come a long way in their safety. These are old ones I brought, but the new ones, a lot of them have been crash tested. Years and years ago, it wasn't that case, but we still would like to transfer a person out of a wheelchair into a regular seat if you can do it. So if they're having problems on the steps, we'll use a wheelchair to load them up in the van, but then if we can, we'll transfer them to a regular bus seat. It's a lot safer that way. There are standards now. WC19, has anybody heard that term? There's standards that RESNA and ANSI here on the screen set for manufacturers of wheelchairs to try to make them safer for transport. And a lot of manufacturers now follow these standards. So, and one of those is and I'll show you, actually I don't think this has it, the transportation brackets was something that the WC19 standards recommended, and a lot of times now our wheelchairs will have those brackets. I have a picture, they're right here actually. You'll see these are tie-down brackets, okay? So it takes the guesswork out of it. There's two in the front, and then there's two in the back, okay? So a lot of chairs now have those, which is great, because in the past, in chairs without them, you're kind of guessing, how do I tie this chair down? Some of these standards, along with the brackets, that these wheelchairs pass the 30-mile-an-hour frontal impact test, provide the brackets I was talking about, provide a crash-tested lap belt, put clear labels where they're needed, and then provide instructions for how to secure the wheelchair to the vehicle. The wheelchair, I said this before, must be in safe working condition in order to transport it. If the brakes don't work or the frame's broken, you don't take that on the van. Don't take that on your vans or the buses. Do the checklist. Check the chair for damage, and then don't transport it if there's serious concerns. Here's a picture of the brackets. They're labeled on this chair. You see that little label there. Now, if you don't have those brackets on a chair, you can still safely secure it. I don't want to get into details because, like I said, I don't work for the transportation department, but generally you want to try to tie that chair down by the frame. Okay, you don't want to put it on something. You don't want to tie it down by the footrest or something that'll come off or that's movable. Loading. A lot of injuries can happen during loading. It's recommended that wheelchairs are loaded on the lift backwards if it's a side-loading vehicle, and forward if it's a rear-loading vehicle. That makes it easier for you. If you load the wheelchair backwards on the lift, it makes it easier for you once you get that person up to pull it onto the van and get it properly positioned. A big one, power wheelchairs should always be powered off once you're on the lift. Okay, don't leave the power on the power chair. And then disengage the chair and manually pull the power chair onto the bus. Any questions with that? Never leave an individual alone when they're elevated on the lift. So if you're by yourself, put somebody on the lift, raise them up, then leave that person as you get onto the vehicle. Okay? You either operate the lift from inside the vehicle, or you can lift them up and actually push them like as far as you can into the vehicle before you leave. Don't allow non-wheelchair users to stand and load or unload on your lifts. So if you have somebody with a walker, we don't recommend that they ride up on the lift because they can't do the steps. Okay, they can get in a wheelchair. And make sure the lift is on level ground. And I talked about this. You don't want to load somebody on a hill or an incline. That's common sense there. And that's all I have. I actually have one handout that I forgot to provide this morning, and that's here. I'm going to pass that out. It's a nice little, actually came from State of Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities. It's a health and safety alert. It actually came out in 2007, but I thought it was a nice checklist, some safety steps with transportation. So that's all I have. Thanks.